Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. Good morning from where we are. Welcome everyone to today's panel, today's discussion. My name is Luivette Resto. I'll be hosting this discussion today with Carmen Giménez. First off, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. Women Who Submit acknowledges the Tongva, Gabrielino, Quiche, and Chumash people as the first inhabitants of the area now known as Los Angeles and Los Angeles County. We thank these First Nations for their caretaking, and we support their ongoing efforts for autonomy. Women Who Submit stands in solidarity with Indigenous people in the US and across the world in their pursuit of human rights and sovereignty. We invite those in Zoom to acknowledge the First Nation people in your area by sharing their tribal and ancestral names in the chat. FaceTime video. Women Who Submit recognizes that land acknowledgements are meaningless if they do not include current struggles for land and autonomy by Native peoples in Palestine, Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and others around the world. Women Who Submit was founded on the principle of advocating for the most vulnerable to secure basic human rights for all and will continue to do so. If you would like to join us in this effort, we encourage you to engage with the resources at Palestinian Feminist Collective, eyesonsudan.net, and Friends on the Congo. This event is being recorded and can be found later on the Women Who Submit YouTube channel with closed captions. For those online, please check that you're muted and keep yourself muted throughout the program. A live transcript can be opened in Zoom. If you do not see a live transcript, you can find it in the menu in the right corner. This workshop will end at 11:15 a.m. and the Zoom room will close. After a break, in-person breakout sessions for new member orientation with Lisa Chibi and submission party with Tony Ann Johnson will begin at 11:45 a.m. Welcome to the Women Who Submit Literary Panel and Orientation. We begin today with a conversation with Carmen Giménez, hosted by me, Luivette Resto. This is a very brief bio of Carmen Giménez, and her bio can go on for much longer. Carmen Giménez is the publisher and director of Graywolf Press. She was a 2019 Guggenheim Fellow and is the author of several books, including Be Recorder, a finalist for the 2019 National Book Award. Welcome, Carmen.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be there. The background noise might be me. I'm in a hotel, so I apologize if you hear any background noise, but that's where I am.
It's all good. It's all good. We're all trying. So Carmen, give us again. So if you want to give us a history of your experience, your extensive experience in publishing that at this point goes 20 years plus, I feel.
Yeah, that's wild.
It is wild.
Yeah, so I think at the core of everything I do, I have always felt that the work of an artist is not just about creating art, but it's also about creating community. And I think in part that stems from learning from a very early age about our aesthetic movements, artistic movements of all shapes and sizes, and from the surrealists to the Latino, to the Chicano movement. So when I was an undergraduate, I worked as an assistant at the Center for Literary Arts at San Jose State University. That's where I got my undergraduate degree. And before that, I wanted to be a journalist, but I ended up being, and in part because I liked all of the technical stuff. I liked laying out, the pages. I liked thinking about content and how content came together. And so when I went to when I went to San Jose State and I studied at the center, I did a lot of behind the scenes stuff, setting up readings, passing out and designing programs. All of that stuff was part of my job, and I felt, I felt very connected to the idea of building community. And my mentor at the time was a man named Alan Soldovsky, and he did this thing that I always found very moving, because he worked really hard to set up these readings, and they were, I saw Lucille Clifton, Allen Ginsberg, I mean, all of these major writing figures, Maxine Hong Kingston, is he would turn around and he would just kind of look at the audience and sort of like, I just, not in an arrogant way, but like, this happened. All these people are here to be moved and to be transformed by the work of these various artists. And so that really resonated for me, the opportunity to connect folks. And the idea of publishing didn't really come. I worked on the literary magazine as an undergraduate, and then I went to graduate school. And around then, I became more and more aware of literary culture and the Mimeo Revolution, and again, the beats and the language poets. I'm from the Bay Area. And again, understanding how art was perpetuated in community and with people coming together and sharing each other's work and creating space. And because I went to the University of Iowa, they have a really great book arts program. And so I became familiar and very attracted to that paper ephemera. And after graduate school, I moved back to the Bay Area. And that's where I founded Noemi Press. I started it really because I had a friend who had a Vandercook, which is a really nice, if anyone knows, there's those really nice letterpress machines, and I really wanted an excuse to play with it. And I know this sounds crazy, but that's absolutely. I was like, oh, I'm starting a chapbook press. Can I do the covers on your nice Vandercook? And so they let me use the Vandercook, and that's how Noemi Press started. We started as a chapbook press, and then started doing. I'm with my former partner. He and I started doing full-length books, and that's really how Noemi Press started. I had always had my life as an academic. I always continued to be a writer as well. My career as a writer took a long time. I graduated MFA, got my MFA in 1997, and my first book was published, I think, I want to say in 2009. Which when I was teaching, I would tell my students all of the time that that sense of feeling rushed, that sense of, well, it's happening to this person, or they just had a poem taken or whatever, that's really sort of a death knell for work, because work takes a really long time to develop. It took me 12 years to get a book, and I think I wasted a lot of that time. I know this is called Women Who Submit, but I think sometimes we should be women who don't submit. Because I think sometimes we want that acknowledgement, and that acknowledgement is important, but it's knowing when the work is ready. And in retrospect, I mean, I spent a lot of money on contests and sending a book out that wasn't ready. And at a certain point, it took me a long time. I was able to turn it around and get it ready to be in the world. But I learned so much from being an editor, from working with Noemi Press, when collaborating with other writers. I think that's really the people we learn from and become really good writers from are those other writers who open their work and open their process to us. And as an editor, I've always felt really honored to be in conversation with other writers to help discover what their vision is and what their what their greatest aspiration is, and to find our way there. Because the one thing that's unique about writing is that we use a common material that I'm using it right now. I use it to order Taco Bell, so we all know how to navigate and move this language around in certain ways. And so that's this shared gift that we have when we are edited and when we are editing. And so I learned a lot about writing from having to articulate to someone, like, this isn't working. It's easy to say this isn't working. It's trying to figure out, well, why isn't it working? And then in collaboration, bringing that work of articulation to my own work and looking at a poem and saying, this isn't working. Why isn't it working? Sort of learning how to talk to myself, and also learning that, I'm editing. I've been editing a few books right now. And one thing you can get advice and you have to hear the right, find the right people to listen to. But I think people who have been editing for a long time are people to trust. But one thing is, I've almost never regretted an edit that I've made or a suggestion that I've taken from someone else. It's very rare that someone's suggestion doesn't take you somewhere. It might not be the same exact place. It might not be the right word suggestion, or you should move the stanza or what, here instead of there. But what I've discovered is that they're calling attention to something. And I'm of a mind that where there's smoke, there's fire. And so if someone points something out, it might not be the thing their solution might not be your solution, but it's worth seeing if there's something else that can take place. And those lessons can be lifelong too. I had a friend with my last book that was published by Graywolf in 2019. The book was really like, I was within weeks of sending the final draft to the editor, and I asked someone who I love very much, admire as a poet, and she basically cut the endings of about half of the poems. And I have this long sequence. It's the title poem, Bee Recorder, and she cut the endings about half of them. And she was totally right. I'm so glad that she did that. And what she saw was a tendency that I had of stepping on my endings a little bit, or having, I like to go to the joke, or I like to go to the, that dun-dun version of in a poem. And she's like, step that back. And so it wasn't just the lesson of that, doing it for those poems. It was what I'm paying attention to when I'm writing poems now is like, well, is it that impulse, or, and knowing, like, now that I know it, I know how to use it sparingly so it has more effect. Because I think we've all read a book and you go across the book and you're like, the endings are starting to all sound the same. And it's because maybe people aren't thinking about the different places where they land. Endings are really hard. I was an academic for many, many years. And I would have never thought of leaving academia, except when this job came up. It seemed like a once in a lifetime opportunity. I was asked if I was going to apply. It wouldn't have even occurred to me to apply to the job, but a couple of people at Graywolf asked me, "Are you going to be applying for this job?" Which I thought, wow, this is wild. And in fact, I remember I was in a restaurant with my partner, and I just started weeping because I was moved. I mean, being on Graywolf was a dream. Like, someone's thinking, oh, you could run Graywolf was just like, it was mind blowing. It felt like, regardless of what happened, it felt like this, like an acknowledgement of the work that I had done. Because, I don't remember where I was, but I was talking, I was at AWP, and I was talking about restaurant. My parents both worked in restaurants most of my childhood and my adulthood. And I think of front of house and back of house. And, front of house is the hostess and the waiter and the servers, and, and the back of house is people who are bussing tables and cleaning tables, washing dishes. And I think of publishers, we're the back of house, and the authors are front of house. And there's something, kind of, you're in the back, no one sees the chaos of putting together a book. And so to be acknowledged that way was very meaningful to me. And so, I went through a very rigorous interview process. And then I thought, okay, like, when do you get to change your life at 50? So I said, okay, I'm going to leave academia and then do this crazy thing, which I'm doing right now. And which I love. And Graywolf is a nonprofit, and so a major aspect of my job is fundraising, which I'm fairly new to. But my mom, and later in her life, sold vacuum cleaners, so I think it's just hustles. I'm just selling vacuum cleaners to folks.
Vacuum
Um,
cleaners that are poetic or
but yeah, exactly. It's just a hustle. Everything's a hustle. And you know, I'm really honored. It's such a pleasure. I work with really brilliant people, and I'm learning a lot about, you know, with it's so interesting, like people's perception of like what I think the word even rejected is problematic to think about when you're talking about submitting work, sending your work out, because it's a toxic word because there's so many reasons that work, I would say, wasn't accepted as opposed to being rejected is another way maybe to contextualize it, because there's so many reasons that work isn't accepted. For one, and I mean, y'all don't have to answer that. I think that more people are submitting than they're actually reading the magazines and stuff that they're sending out. You're seeing magazines go under all over the place, in part because people aren't subscribing. And so I do think, like, again, going back to that idea of literary citizenship, that part of our literary citizenship is subscribing to the magazines that are meaningful to us. If you haven't ever read an issue of a magazine, don't send to it. I think that's tacky, but people do it all of the time. When I was an editor at Puerto del Sol at New Mexico State, we would get mail for a dead editor, like she was dead, or you know, or someone who hadn't been an editor for like 10 or 20 years, and I think it's disrespectful to the work of editors. And it does lend itself, it does go back to the original point I'm going to make, is that there is so much work that gets sifted through, that your work could be really great, but there's not a spot for it. And so it's not that the work isn't rejected, that there's something wrong with it, that it's a reject, but that it's a numbers game, you know, you know, and it's a timing thing. We just got a poem that's about flowers and a grandmother, and this particular combination. This is such a great poem, but we just don't want to run this type of poem again in the same issue or in the next issue. There are all of these factors that are involved in this. And when I started working at Graywolf, I thought, wow, we're gonna, you know, this is gonna be shooting fish in a barrel. What's interesting is it's not. It's still, because of just the expectations, because of the books that are on the list, our expectations are really informed by that. And what Graywolf is looking for is such a unique intersection of magic, skill, innovation, risk, um, you know, je ne sais quoi-ness. And so, and the, you know, and the last, in a way, it's almost doesn't matter what the story is. It's just, you know, the sense of mastery that a person has with language. And so anyone that I talk to about writing who wants to be a writer, you know, I think like immerse yourself in grammar, immerse yourself in syntax, because you can fix plot. It's really hard to make someone a really great sentence writer.
Mhm.
So I think I'll stop there. Um, and you know, happy to answer any questions or happy to extend into a conversation, but that really covers you know, the broad strokes, as it were.
Yeah, no, you definitely, I was taking notes here too as you were talking because I resonated a lot with what you were saying, especially the last part you said, basically do your homework before you submit somewhere, right? And that's one of the things that women who submit actually reminds people all the time. It's like, do your homework about who you're submitting to, right? Like making sure that the kind of work that you are creating fits their mission statement, right? Fits what they have been publishing already, right? And just doing that kind of research ahead of time is so vital to the process, right? Instead of just blindly submitting, and also like what you said about essentially supporting these spaces, right? Supporting the magazines, supporting the journals that publish work, right? It's important to also support them because if we don't support them, then they won't be anywhere to submit to.
Exactly.
in the long run. So I really appreciated that, and listening to what you said about finding people to read your work who you trust and to edit, right? And to taking that to heart. Like I was listening to you and I was reminded of my own process of how many times I gave my latest collection to so many people and was told by various different people different things, and I had to just listen to it, and like you said, where there's smoke there's fire, and so a lot of things got cut out, right? Like from the original, the first iteration of it, like 10 poems, 15 poems just are somewhere else right now. And again, I didn't take it personal. These people that I trusted saw something that I didn't see at the time. So I
Yeah.
really 100% agree with that statement. And so I had a question. I had a couple of questions for you. So
Yeah, of course.
you were with Noemi Press for 20 years. What did you take from that experience into Graywolf? What are some of the lessons you learned that you're still carrying on with you now in this new role?
I think one of the advantages I had, that I brought to the table with from Noemi Press is that I did in some way or another, I did every single piece of the work of putting a book into the world, from acquisition to, post, post, a year after front list life, backlist life. And so knowing even at even at a superficial level, just the arc, the story, the way what a book has to go through, I think was helpful. And then also being an author and understanding, what those needs are, what it's like to feel anxious about what's going to happen to your book, what expectations there are. I think that combination really helped me and be a unique candidate. But I had also been a Graywolf reader, since I was yay high, before I went to graduate school, before, when I was an undergraduate. So I've been a lifelong Graywolf fan, and knew the catalog very well. So, and this is why I think if you can participate in one way or another, being a reader for a magazine or for a small press, volunteering, I think you just learn so much about what makes a manuscript or, a manuscript or a set of poems stand out, or a story collection, and you develop really strong instincts and know how to talk about books. And one thing, so I can tell you a little bit about acquisitions process at Graywolf. I think it's probably helpful. For the most part, we receive all pros through agents, and then we have, we receive across both genres about 2,000 manuscripts. So that means we have a lot to read. We have 6 of us on the editorial staff. So you can imagine how much reading on top of editing 30 plus books a year that we have to do. And so you have to kind of develop pretty quick instincts as a reader. But a book we receive a book, it'll have a description, it'll get assigned, either one of us, the main editor. I mean, we share the work. It isn't, if there's something that has a high priority, like this is an existing author of ours, or it's someone that's wants to know by next week, they're going to put it on auction in a week or 2 weeks. And we don't go to auction because we don't have auction type money. So if it's a book that's going to go to auction, we say great, because part of what a nonprofit indie press does is it's the books that can't, aren't necessarily going to, go to auction, or aren't going to find that crazy audience right out of the gate. And if there's interest, if an editor is interested in the book and wants to seriously consider it, then it's brought to an acquisitions team. And at that point, you're describing to the team what it is, what the book is about, why you think this book is important, what books you might compare it to, and who you think an audience is And I think it's really, really important for authors to be able to, in a way, write that kind of pitch for themselves. In part, especially if if you're working with an agent, that's going to be a natural part of the work that you do. But I think just as an author, at any point, again, trying to find a home for it, or after it's published, you're going to be asked that question a great deal. The acquisitions team is a combination of all of the editorial staff and then a marketing person and sometimes a salesperson. And the marketing person is there to kind of sort of know, well, this is how we might sell it. So it's as much to communicate to the author, like we would be able to, we would know how to tell the story, and then for the marketing team to say to us, is this viable? I'm telling you, there are 5 books that we know that are coming out that are about the same thing, and those are valid questions, because we have to sell books. So like it's really important to be mindful of what the aesthetic contribution is. But at the end of the day, most books don't sell more than 500 copies. Just across, most books don't sell more than 100 copies. So those are factors. They're not. Graywolf is lucky as a nonprofit. We can take risks because part of our the support we receive is through contributed revenue. And then at that point, if the team and at Graywolf, if you're excited about a book, you're not going to get much pushback, because we trust each other and we're excited about, like, well, what even if a book is rough, we know that we each we've seen each other's work, taking a book from a rough state to something that has a lot more polish. And that's when you see a book that's a Graywolf book. We just recently did an exhibit at the library at the University of Minnesota, and I saw manuscript pages for Carmen Machado's collection of short stories, and it was wild, all of the edits. And I sent Ethan, who was the editor, a picture, and he's like, and it doesn't even show how the stories that we cut and the stories that we added and how we moved stories. So like what you end up seeing at the end that's the collaborative process. But we make an offer. There are lots of pieces to consider, translation rights, audio rights, all of that's part of the conversation. And usually we are, depending on the state of the book, are looking at a 2 to 3 year window from contract to publication date. Galleys usually go out about 6 to 9 months before pub date. And so you're going to need a final manuscript about a year before your book is actually published. So when my book was accepted, it was accepted in November of 2016. And it was published. And then I got the call from Jeff, and he's like, okay, so we're going to publish it August 2019. I was like, what? And I tried to, I was like, push back a little bit. I was like, you can't do it sooner. And he's like, no, that's as soon as we can. I'm so glad I had all that time, because it happened so quickly. And in fact, I turned in my final manuscript in 2018 for it to come out in 2019. And the marketing team is very active. They're very enthusiastic. They're, a lot, they read the books. Everybody reads the books or an excerpt of the book in the entire staff. We have an editorial presentation every season. And we share the author questionnaire, and people do comps, which are, comparisons of books that are, aesthetically or subject matter in some way or another connected to or speak to something in the book. And so we're all aware of what's going on with the catalog. It's weird, because people will be asking me, well, what's coming out right now with Graywolf that you're excited about? And I'm like, I'm thinking 2 years ahead. Actually, I can tell you what's happening next year. I mean, I know what's happening, but the future is so, in the editor's mind, is so present, because once a book is, in production, you're already moving. I'm editing books that aren't coming out until 2026, like actively editing books that aren't coming up, because I have to have them ready next year. And we do lay hands pretty heavily on them. And so that, yeah, so my job is is to coordinate all of this, is to be aware of it, is to look at the catalog in general, is to be in dialogue. I acquire some books, I acquired some translations, I've acquired 3 or 4 translations, some essay collections, a short story collection. Graywolf is going to start doing a single author translated work of poetry, of contemporary poetry every year. So next year, we have a book coming out in October of 2024. So we're starting to do the marketing work on that book. And it's by a young Peruvian poet named Disa Ota. And we're looking for other collections of translated poetry. And what I'm looking for right now is primarily work in translation from countries that aren't often represented by other presses. Just, there are lots of, interestingly and wonderfully, lots of work from Argentina and Chile, Uruguay, there are Bolivia, there aren't, countries like that are often represented. So we're just looking widely. But there are 18 people on the staff. So I think a lot of it is like, how do you make sure that, you get from point A to point B and everyone is happy? That's a big part of their job too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
What are some of you've been in this role for 2 years now, this new role. And it sounds really collaborative. So it doesn't sound like you're flying solo at all in any way, shape, or form, which is beautiful. Have you encountered, I know you mentioned earlier about fundraising being new to you, a new aspect, and I was curious about if being in this role has given you any challenges yet that you're like, and you mentioned the fundraising, so I was curious, like, is that a challenge, or is that just something new wrapping your head around?
I think, fundraising is just new. It's just like any other part of a job. I do think when you are the boss, and when I first started the job, we would have meetings and they'd be like, so what should we do? And I'd be like, yeah, what should we do? They'd be like, no, you're supposed to tell us what we should do. So
I love it. Yeah, what should we do? I love the word we. Like, yeah, what should we
yeah,
do?
exactly. And so there is a sense of like wanting to do it right. And you have to sometimes just decide. And coming from academia, I don't want to knock academia, but like there's the illusion that you're making the decisions as like an independent as an independent scholar, but no, you're not making any decisions, not, material decisions that affect your mind, your day to day. So I think that's can be tough. Obviously, I turn to my staff all the time for feedback, but sometimes you also have to say, I know that's what you think we should do, but I think it's trusting your instincts. I think like that's been a big lesson for me, and also understanding that sometimes your instincts are wrong. And that's scary when, in some way, not that there's anything catastrophic that I've had to decide, but people's livelihoods depend on the kind of decisions that the boss can make. Or sometimes it feels that way, or there are decisions that there's no one on the staff that you can really turn to. And that's why I have a really great community of colleagues who are, work for other organizations that I can turn to and say, have you ever had this weird particular kind of problem? I think it's important. They call it the kitchen cabinet, which I appreciate having. But yeah, it's academia gives you the illusion that there's not a hierarchy when there is a very, very solid hierarchy. And the illusion keeps things from progressing sometimes. We have to keep moving. We have to get the books out. And so things can't get caught up on, and so that pace and that sense of like resolution and like deadline, and that's been refreshing and exciting and also overwhelming.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. It sounds like, I mean, I can only imagine. So that's why I can only imagine how overwhelming it could feel. Um, and another question I had for you is because of your experience and as a witness, as a participant and also a witness of the publishing landscape, uh, how have you seen it change specifically for Latinx writers or with, and authors? Like, how have you seen it change from when you started, right? Working, even like you said, you were an undergrad, like, you started there and then now where you are now, how have you seen it really change and move?
Well, so we're talking about the late 90s.
Right. I know,
And
I know, I'm like, I know exactly where I was. I'm like, yep, the late 90s, go for it. Yeah.
when there wasn't, there were presses and they published one or two people of color. And then there were presses like Dia Chucha that, really were doing the work of making sure that those voices were amplified. Those were, the Quinto Sol. I mean, those were the models that I was looking at. And I think one difference we see is that presses are publishing a lot more BIPOC writers. One difference we don't see is BIPOC people running publishing situations.
Right. Right.
And so there was a really great report from from Penn talking about the publishing industry. And, the number that I walk away from with that one is that publishing industry is 73% to 78% white. So it's wonderful that the books are out there, but they're being edited and curated still by an overwhelmingly white population. And there are women BIPOC women who are at the level of where I am, um, but I don't know them, or I haven't met them, or you know what I mean, like, or there's, you know what I mean. There should just be like it shouldn't be this hard for me, or any woman of color. And I think the difference too was when I was starting Noemi, like I said, it was such a whim. And I think I wouldn't have started it if I was like, it became serious later. And I remember I was talking when, a couple, 2 or 3 years into it, I was talking to G.E. Patterson, the poet, who was, early Graywolf poet. I think, his book came out in, I want to say the early aughts, but at any rate, at the time I remember saying, you know what I want? I want to I want to have a press that publishes people of color. And it's not, and I was also really inspired by Giovanni Singleton, who was doing Nocturnes, the literary magazine that was so important. That's publishing innovative writing, and it's publishing BIPOC writers, but it's not like siloed that way. And that, it's just a consequence of being good curators that there are BIPOC people as opposed to tick in the box. And that was always a subtext of the way we worked. And I think, as the beginning of the change in the early aughts, and was that people started ticking the boxes. But I feel like now there's a little bit more mindfulness in terms of what books are acquired and what books are put into the world, but the industry itself has not changed at all. In part because people hold on to these jobs for a really long time, in part because these publishing interns require a certain class of, people who can afford to live in New York and, you know, work for free. Uh, so the industry still has a lot of work to do itself. I definitely acknowledge that. And you know, how can we be a solution? I mean, we definitely try to cultivate talent. As an organization, I'm fairly new to the organization. I feel like we have a pretty intersectional staff, but we're not the big five. They're the ones who need to do the heavy lifting, and they have, you know, zero incentive to do it.
No, and I agree. And that was one of my questions is like, what's the area of growth? And I agree. It's like we shouldn't have to be the one to do the work and the labor, right? It's like we didn't, this system was not the system obviously was not created by us, right? So we're just trying to fight the system that was created. So they're the ones that have to do all this work and all this internal work as to why there's such a huge inequity. And it's beautiful to hear, how intersectional Graywolf is. And I guess a part of me is also wondering, like, what can we do as writers, though, from a writer standpoint, right? Because again, you're still writing and you're still an author. Like, I know you're at the helm of Graywolf, but as a writer, what advice or suggestions? What can we do as writers in a situation like this, where the area of growth for the publishing industry? I know the conversations have started within the last few years, right? With especially with the movement of Dignidad Literaria, you know, but obviously there's still much work that needs to be done. So what can we do? I'm not saying that Latinx writers have to do the labor at all, but what can we do? And I have some suggestions in my brain, but I'm really curious to hear your thoughts.
I want to hear your suggestions first.
Because I'm going back to what you said earlier about supporting, right? My thing is like, you know, it comes down to that. It's like support these independent presses, support, the presses that are promoting and that are putting out BIPOC writers. Like you got to buy the books too, like you said earlier, so that people can stay in these positions, so they can do the work. So I'm always about like, yeah, I need you to support these presses and that are being run by women, who are being run by writers of color, and who are intentionally and mindfully promoting and publishing these voices. So my thing is like, buy the books if you can, right? And if you can't buy the books, and if you're in a position, if you're a librarian, acquire the books, put them in your libraries, or do what you can with the skill set and the resources that you have, right? And so that's my brain. That's where I'm going, like as far as accountability and what I can do as, like you said earlier, a literary citizen, as someone who writes but also who consumes, right? I'm not just producing the work, but I'm consuming the work. So what can I do? Because I do feel a sense of responsibility. So that's kind of what I thought about. So I was just curious what you were thinking.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said, I think also you can go into your bookstores and request the books for them to order the books. I think that's another thing that we recommend. I mean, that's such a hard question because it's such a monolith. But I guess if you get acquired by Big Five, ask them. Just say, hey, I'm looking around and y'all are white, or I think just start the conversation. But it's, I would have never imagined. I think I should complete my thought. If I hadn't started Graywolf, if I hadn't started Noemi Press on a whim, I would have never imagined that I could be a publishing professional when I was in my 20s, because I wasn't a white man, and that's what I thought, you know. And so I do think that there's just a way in which we can communicate to young folks that no, actually you can be a cultural producer. You can be, I hate to use the word influencer because that has a different
Right.
connotation, but being a publisher is being a type of influencer. You're participating in the shaping of culture and literature. And I think it's, being a model. I'll talk to anybody who, young person who wants to know about this field. And it just said, like, this is a real career path. And especially now with the MFAs, I think it's a very viable career path to go into publishing and literary editing, and literary editing can look lots of different ways. But I think, the more cultural capital that's grabbed, you know, the change comes from, it's a top-down change in a way. And it's also just like, I think sometimes, you know, you leave the ladder, because I think there are a lot of folks who get success and they don't look back. And they don't look forward too, because my success is built on my elders and people who've made paths for me. And I try to honor that whenever I can, both by making space for people who are coming up, and also for honoring the work and emulating my elders who who carved these paths for me. And I think that there needs to be more of that, just culturally. I think that that's more of an effective change that we can all participate in. Is it's not just about being like getting yours, because that's not going to change anything permanently. And yeah, I mean, those are the things that come to mind, but everything you said is exactly what I would have said.
And the mentorship part too, like, I think that's kind of what I'm getting at with what you just shared, is like, I definitely see that when I started, in my MFA program, or when I was an undergrad, the only Latina writer I had to work with is Elena Viramontes. She was it. She was everyone's advisor who was Latina on campus,
Yeah.
right? It didn't matter if you were an English major or not. Elena was mentoring, or she was the advisor to I don't know how many women. And I mean, she played a huge role for me. If it wasn't for Elena encouraging and nudging, even though she was in fiction and I was going into poetry, if it wasn't for her, and her encouragement and her courses in the 90s, I would never be where I am right now. And I owe so much to her. But then I agree, it's like in the MFA program, I was the only Latina again. And I was just, it's an isolating feeling, but now I feel a sense of responsibility now I guess we're becoming the elders to a certain extent, which is kind of weird to think about, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's like, wow,
Yeah.
when did I become a señora?
Exactly.
When did I become señora? But nonetheless, I do think that we do have I always go back to the word responsibility. I really feel a sense of responsibility to give back what someone gave me back in the 90s. Whether it was a listening ear, whether it was, here, sit down, here's my office, ¿qué pasó?
Yeah.
And sometimes it just takes that. And so, or, with Martin saying, you got to change the order, and this is why. And constantly having him in the back of my brain, right? Even now. So I'm going to close. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience to ask their questions. But I have this one question that, because I did my nerdy research here, and
brother.
I did it. I did my research because I was like, no, I mean, come on, like, I gotta come correct to this conversation. There's no way that I was going to talk. There was no way I was going to talk to you and not come correct, right? So I was doing a little nerdy research, and I was rereading this interview you did with Rigoberto Gonzalez in 2016.
Damn. Deep cuts.
I told you I did my nerdy research. So I was reading this conversation, this interview that you had with Rigoberto back in 2016 that was published, and people can check this out on NBC Latino. And there was a really good question that he asked you, and unfortunately, it's a timely question because it pertains to now. And in 2016, he asked you about the importance, because it was we were in an election year, and it was so he asked you about the importance of Latinx poetry during that time, the importance of Latinx poetry during an election year. And I think about that question because here we are again, about to enter another troubling election year. And then you compound that with multiple genocides, and you compound that with the rise of book banning once again, right? The highest number, I think, was, the percentage was in 2023. So I wanted to ask you this question, right? To be like, well, two questions. How do we respond as poets? And then again, what is how important is Latino poetry now, once again, in a time like this?
That's such a good question. And I mean, I think, I mean, it's complicated. I mean, I think poetry is always important. How we inscribe, how we tell our stories, what our stories are. I think an interesting, what I would say that's a little bit different maybe of my thinking too is I think that the question of taking risks, taking aesthetics risks, being changing art, disrupting art, I think it's really important. And you know, poetry at the end of the day has limited political capital. I mean, it's important, but it does have limited political capital. Um, and that's why I think, again, it goes back to the idea of being a literary citizen, that you're making space so that you're using, if you know, whatever cultural capital you gain from poetry in different ways. But I do think that I'm curious about ways in which innovation, the possibilities of innovation are subsumed or are that identity becomes the innovation, because I think it reifies you know, the problems of the siloing that we're talking about. And I'm excited about work that's, you know, invested in like, how can I just fuck with poetry? You know, like not, you know, in whatever way that, you know, it doesn't matter. We can't not be who we are, and answering and inscribing is important. But I'm interested too in aesthetic disruption. In addition to that, I think that we have gift as communicators, and that writing reviews, writing essays as poets, as artists, that's another avenue. Writing for our local paper. You know, we don't think about that, but that's how a lot of old people get their news, is the local paper. And that's how we can connect with folks that aren't otherwise going to, you know, aren't going to go buy our book at the Milkweed bookstore. So using our gift for communication beyond poetry, if we're looking to you know, do political action. But you know, I think like by art, sometimes just art existing is obviously is dangerous. And by being an artist, you're a dangerous person. And so I think, you know, especially if you're queer, BIPOC, you know, marginalized in any number of ways that people are marginalized, which becomes in a way a wider and wider swath. And so that I guess another irony is that we need to look more widely at who our allies can be. I think that if we are you know, the one thing that the radical right is very good at is being inclusive. They are like, they're in the sense of like, doesn't matter how crazy you are, how fucked up you are, if you hate the same people that we do, come along. And I think like we kind of have to catalyze a little bit that way. You know, I think there are these kind of divisions or these beefs or these things that at the end of the day, when we're facing ecological and democratic apocalypse, are really not that important. We could be way more powerful as a coalition supporting each other beyond our work as poets, beyond our petty beefs, beyond, you know, there's poetry is church, you know, and so like in church opens its doors to everybody. And I think like going back a little bit to that, but again, you just have to keep making art and amplifying other people's voices. That was a very jumpy answer, but I guess, you know.
No, it was Poetry's Church. I'm gonna remember that one today. I'm gonna
Okay.
sit with that. I'm serious. I'm gonna sit with that. I'm gonna sit with that because I don't think I've heard that before. And yeah, coming from a Catholic school background, now it's stuck in my head now, Poetry's Church. But I want to sit with that for a while. But I think that's a really very beautiful way of describing it. So I appreciate that. I'm going to open it up now to the audience who's been patiently listening to us here converse, and opening it up to their questions for that last 15 minutes that we have. So if anyone has any questions, the chat is available. And so here we are. If anybody has a question for Carmen, please feel free.
I actually have a question on Zoom.
Oh,
Giovanni.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Hi. It was all so brilliant. I have so much to say, but I guess I'm interested in registering for women who submit. And as an older writer who's been around for a really, really long time, I'm wondering if you could speak to this idea of the marketplace, right? This idea now that innovation is like this phrase, everybody wants something new, but what does that really mean? I talk to people at AWP and all these other places as a way of, I don't know, hedging my bets, but also trying to understand how they're approaching the marketplace and versions of innovation. Like, what does that really mean when everything I see is still left aligned? It's still formatted the same way, right? So what does that really mean? Do you know? And that's my question. I mean,
Yeah, that's a good question.
I don't send work out at all. Do you know? And I am very, very well versed on what's out there, and I have tons of subscriptions. But when it comes to someone saying, "Oh, yeah, we want something that's innovative," and you send them something that you think is innovative, they're like, "No."
Well, I mean, I think that's such a good question. And if they say no, then they're not the right people for you. And I
Right?
think
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
and so I think, I mean, Giovanni, you're such a, it's like, because I feel like I'm talking to, the original originator.
No, but I mean, my thing is though, is that what you're speaking about is that I think of innovation, even in terms of our approach to submitting and sending our work out into the world, right? Because I did, like for my first book, not to get in the pulpit, which I do, I have started going to Bible study actually. Um, but I feel like when I am thinking about when I was sending my first book out, I sent to all the contests. I did all the things that they tell you to do in an MFA program. And then, dear Carmen, with you following your intuition, what I got was, you're not going to win a contest. Just stop. Look at how other people whose work you admire, look at how their first books were published, right? And so I looked at Lucille Clifton, all these people whose first books were actually published because someone put their book in front of the right person. And that's what happened with my first book. And then it won the California Book Award. So I'm wondering if you have any advice also about ways to approach this to get to the top of the heap, to even get some kind of conversation, because submission isn't just about, it's not a one-way street, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, I think, right now, again, you're one of the original visual poets, and now every manuscript, it's sort of like erasures 10 years ago or 5 years ago, everyone hasn't had an erasure. Now everyone has a visual poem, and, you know, you're one of the original, you know, you've been doing visual poetry from the beginning. And sort that sense of like what your influence signifies, and who it signifies, you know, who it signifies for. I think it's important to talk to people who, you know, are admirers. And I mean, I think this is a conversation that you and I have had a long time, is you have people in your corner. You just have to get them to be doing work for you. You just have to, you know, you have to start saying like, okay, you talk the talk. Now it's time to walk the walk. I need you to help me do X. I need you to do an introduction. I need you to, you know, I need you to tell me who I need to put this book in front of. We have people in our lives who sometimes are just waiting to be asked that question. They, you know, we don't like, you know, we don't like to be metiches, you know, we don't like to be I don't mind, but, you know, but friends ask me advice, I'll give it to them. And I think like that's something that's really is to tap into the networks that you have that are pretty extensive and deep. And it's also just to say, you know what, like careers are so complex because you can have books that have really long lives that are really subterranean. I think like people think that the ascent is I publish with this level of press, and then I publish with this level of press, and then I publish with this level of press. But that's not the way the ecosystem works anymore, because you can publish with this level of press and they're going to take really, really good care of you and really give attention to your book and to your career. And people are going to know that's where I go to get that book. And I mean, Graywolf is Graywolf, but Graywolf published Percival Everett for over 20 years, you know, and now is tonight the Oscars. Like that's a commitment, you know, that's a relationship in which, you know, some of those books over time did not sell that, you know, compared to where Riverhead wouldn't say, we're going to keep publishing your book every year that you write it for 20 plus years. You find someone who's going to say, yes, this is your home. We're going to take care of your career, not your book. And I think like that's what you need to be looking. I think that's what we should all be looking for, is that relationship.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we see that Monona has her hand up?
Yes, I do. I was going to call her on next. Yes, Monona.
Hey.
Hey. Thank you, Giovanni.
Hi.
It's what a nice conversation, great conversation.
Thank you.
One of the things that's been railing around in my head as we think about being literary citizens is just this question of how little support there is in general for the arts in this country. And it always feels like we're fighting for crumbs, and some of us don't fit in the marketplace and maybe never will, but we're serious writers. But I'm just wondering if you've been having conversations now in your role in raising money about how do we start to fight for more support for the arts in this country in general. It's just so stingy. You know, I had applied for NEA and I got this rejection. 35 prose writers every other year out of thousands of applicants. And that's just so stingy. You know, like, are you having any conversations on that, like just supporting overall, you know, funding for arts in this country?
I mean, I think the federal government they're doing as much as we'll ever imagine, you know, that's going to go away. The NEA, I mean, like that level of fund, that's never going to change. I think the tough part is what the arts is facing too, is that social justice and political action is very justifiably, a lot of folks who've been making who had normally been making contributions to the arts are like, this world is scarier than, you know, like supporting the arts. And so I think that we just have to learn to do what we can with the resources that we have. But I do think like collective efforts, you know, and I guess the question is always like, well, what do you want? What do you think is important? What does your ego want? Because I think sometimes, you know, and this is a question I struggle with myself, is like right now I feel like, oh, I'm invisible. Everyone thinks of me as a publisher now. Da, da, da. I'm like, that's ego. In a way, like, it doesn't matter. Like, what do I, and I'm free in a way. I can do whatever I want as an artist. So like, what do I want to accomplish as an artist? Imagining that no one is going to see it, or no one is going to give a fuck about what it is that I'm doing. I think like letting go a little bit of that desire of like, of recognition. I think, I mean, even our most successful authors have to have jobs, have to have, and it's, they're not teachers, they're not all teachers, they're lawyers, they're doing all sorts of things. I think like the idea that an artist can, you know, can be sustained by their art, it's like winning the lottery. And it, you know, I think about it that way. And so, I mean, when it gets to 1 billion, I'll admit, I buy the tickets. I'll buy 20 tickets when it gets to 1 billion. And my first thought is like, it's gonna go into the arts. But there's nothing that we can do about people caring about ecological disaster and the end of democracy and trying to make a case for it. People are invested in the arts and they understand that, but you know, I'm not gonna, it's tough. It's just tough in the world, in the fundraising world right now, to imagine that. And you can, I think there's nothing more important than the arts, in many ways, but it's not the only way. And so it's also finding the right audience. I think they're making networks with folks and just asking the questions, but that's being affiliated with a nonprofit. The federal government isn't going to do anything new.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even thinking of myself so much personally anymore, but just the culture as a whole, you know, how as writers and artists can we, you know, take on a bigger role in promoting the arts in general.
Tell your rich friends, you know, and it doesn't take much. You send $10 to an organization, that makes a difference. $10, $15, you know what I mean? If enough people send $10, $15 to an organization, it can have a huge effect. And so I think like when we think of, you know, I have regular, really small donations to a bunch of little tiny presses that don't, you know, hit me super hard on the wallet. But I know that they make an incremental difference. And so I think, you know, send $30 a year to 5 presses, you know, that's enough. It even just like it, I don't know, you're present. And then if you have rich friends, just be like, hey, check out, have you ever thought of making a contribution to this organization? Because I think that like, literary organizations, especially super small nonprofits, don't have, you know, a lot of development, momentum.
Thank you for that.
So yeah, send your rich friends to Graywolf, in other words.
I wish I had them.
We have time for one more question, or one
Sure.
brief question. If anybody out there has a question, they want to raise their virtual hand. Do I see someone? Oh yes. Hey, Angela.
Hi, Angela.
Hi, Carmen.
Hi.
Good to see you, man.
Good to see you.
I want to tell everybody this woman keeps her word. She keeps her word. I'll just leave it at that. So I wanted to ask you, Carmen, what kind of setbacks did you experience on your road to where you are now, and how did you overcome them?
I mean, I think early on, I won't name names, but I remember early on, I accepted a manuscript by a white woman who insisted she was publishing a chapbook with us, even though it wasn't a chapbook. And I knew part of it is that she didn't want a full-length book associated with us. And at a certain point, we're like, no, this is your, own it. And then in retrospect, like she's like, oh yeah, you know, I think people not being taken seriously, I think, is the biggest setback at different, you know, in all of the roles that I've played, not being taken seriously. But I have to say, like, this is petty, but people who know me know this is very true. Like 90% of my drive is revenge.
Don't get on your bad side.
Is I'll show you, you know, you don't think I can do this. I'm going to learn how to do this, and I'm going to learn how to do this better than everyone. So yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yes, just a quick shout out. Muchos thank yous to Angela for connecting Women Who Submit with Carmen, please. So thank you.
Yeah, my joy.
So
My
shout out
pleasure.
to Angela for this. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
She was so gracious and kind, and I didn't even know when I met her. I didn't even know who she was. I mean, I was at Community of Writers, and I saw, oh, this lady is really cool. She's nice. And then when I saw that she was publisher of my dream, I'm in your ear again, about publishing with Graywolf, I was just over the top, and I just started asking her for favors. And she delivered. So thank you, Carmen.
Yeah, thank you so
And
much
so
for the time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Angela, for real. Thank you for that. And Women Who Submit, we definitely thank you for reaching out. And Godman, thank you for, you know, this morning. I know we're multitasking here. We talked about that early before the recording, that as moms, we're multitasking here today. So I really appreciate.
My pleasure.
Conversation was really, really nourishing today. So
Thank you.
I wanna
Thank
say
you.
thank you. And
All right.
we're getting
Good.
we're seeing some folks here say thank you to you and to, you know, to the conversation. I'm going to close this out, and I just have a couple of announcements before